Hi folks, this is Meredith from the Papery Craftery, and today I'm going to be demonstrating 8 different ways to fill in spaces in quilling. And what I mean by filling in spaces is when you have a template, like this strawberry here, I'm talking about just that, the spaces, anything inside the lines. So the stem and the inside of the strawberry, or in this beehive that I've done before, inside each section of the beehive. How do you fill that? How do you fill in the bees? Every time I share a tutorial where I have a template and then I show you how to fill in the spaces, I have already made the choice of how I'm going to fill in each one. And I try to do it in a way that makes sense with the design. Like on the outside of this apple, and I'll link to that video here, I chose to fill it in with just some coils. And that is a choice to just use regular shapes to fill in spaces. But today I'm going to be sharing 8 other ways that you can fill in the spaces of your templates just using your standard quilling supplies, whatever paper you have. And if you are going to practice this at home, you will need a work board and some wax paper and whatever quilling tools that you usually use, with some white glue and some tweezers. The first technique is something I've shown quite a few times on my site to do different projects, and that is just some straight lines. If you're familiar with that apple project I mentioned earlier in the video, that's how I filled in the main part of the apple. I decided to make some double thick lines by gluing some papers together and filling in the inside of the apple. But you do have some choices when you're doing this technique in how you would like your end product to be. If you put your lines a little bit closer together, it will look more full. If you spread them out a little bit, it'll give a bit more of a negative space, make your project look a little bit more open and airy. Next, for a kind of a play on that same idea, I use those double thick lines again and cut them into pieces to make some arching lines. And this is definitely more of a, I don't know, sort of a whimsical way of filling in a space here. You don't have to do this exact design, but just something fun to try and just mixing up those straight lines. Number 3 on the list is the Beehive Technique. And I actually just recently showed how to use the Beehive Technique on these antique inspired ornaments. And that little ruffle there is just a Beehive Technique. Just to recap that again, you are going to need a slotted tool for that. And all you have to do is just put your tool in, give it a few turns, take it out, and move on down the line. Put your slotted tool back in, give it a few turns, take it out, and move on down the line. And in addition to making a nice little decoration for your ornament, you can use that same idea to fill in these spaces. You can do a few different colors together, make sort of an ombre effect, and you can really fill in a good amount of space in a short amount of time and just make it look really interesting. I have an old video on the Beehive Technique and I'll link that above. The next idea I wanted to share is just using simple scrolls to fill in spaces. And this really, it couldn't be easier. Scrolls are just coils that aren't all the way rolled. Pretty much, they have a little bit of a tail on them. This one I used 3 different shades of green. I also added just some small curved pieces to add a little bit more visual interest. I like this idea because it adds a lot of negative space, which might be helpful for your design. And another version of that same idea with the scrolls is what I call stretched scrolls. I don't really have a better term for that, but I did them when I was making that beehive that you saw earlier in the video, and I will link to that up above if you want to practice that after this video. But all it is just a matter of rolling up scrolls but then pulling them out a little bit again so they have a nice long tail. I also like to include some straighter lines and also just some tight coils of different sizes that you can see in this picture here. I just think it adds just to the overall look. But again, this is one where you're going to have a lot of open space in your design. Number 6 on the list is using swirls for the inside of your open spaces in quilling. Swirls are just made of multiple sheets rolled up together and then pulled apart one by one. I have a pretty good video about this. It's very popular and I'll link to that. And once you start doing these, they're kind of irresistible. It's very hard to stop doing them. But they make a really fun way of filling in open spaces because it's sort of a wow. In the example here, I put a few different types of swirls that I've demonstrated in that video, but you can just use the standard ones where they just come down to a point. You can roll up a double swirl. You can do whatever you like. I have a whole tutorial on my blog about making a pumpkin using swirls, and I will link to that one as well. For the last two ideas, we're getting a little bit more into the modern world of quilling. The first one here is just a bunch of multicolored rings made up of different shades of similar colors. I did kind of an orange and then yellow, green into blue, and I just kind of randomly chose different colors and rolled them up and made them into tight coils. I have a bunch of extra ones here. I had a lot of fun with this part. This is something you're seeing more and more in the quilling world. It's definitely more of an abstract way of doing things, but it's really pretty and it's really fun. In the one that I made, I sort of domed them, the rings, and then glued them in, but I've seen them where they're almost even sort of like spikes, or they can be flat as well, but it's a fun way of doing things. It makes it look a lot more solid. It gives a lot more weight to the quilling. Definitely something to play around with. The last idea that I'm sharing today is something that I've just seen a lot of recently, and it's filling your shapes with zigzags of paper. And here is a little bit more of a close-up. It's hard to see exactly what's going on here, but all I did was take different shades of pink paper and just fold them back and forth, kind of like the old accordion folds, the way you used to make little fans when you were in grade school. This paper is a little bit thicker than my normal paper. It's not as thick as a cardstock, but if I had that, that's probably what I would have used here. And I start just by folding the strip in half and then just going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. The hardest part is making sure that it's exactly the size I want. I definitely had to hold it up a bunch of times and make sure that it was actually getting smaller as I went. But again, I'm seeing this more and more. This is also on the more modern side of quilling. It gives a lot more texture to the pieces. It's really cool. I especially like it with the ombre way of doing it here, where it's going from lighter to darker. Definitely something I'm going to be playing around with more in the future. And there you have all together 8 different ideas for how to fill your empty spaces when you're quilling. Thinking outside the box of just filling up spaces with regular old quilled shapes, which are beautiful, lovely, designs like that, but sometimes you need something a little bit different. So I hope you enjoyed this one. I'd love to hear in the comments below which one of these was your favorite, which one inspired you to try something new in the future, just generally what you think about it. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe. You don't want to miss any of the videos that I have coming up. And also be sure to look down in the description box below to see the links for all those other videos and tutorials I mentioned during this video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye-bye.